I was online the other night and someone came to my face asserting with no doubt that small caps are dead. Now, I don't usually follow up on statements like that because they definitely not useful for the investor. But then half an hour later, Wells Fargo came up with this article. Now, it doesn't mean that it's true if it's written online, but now we have two hints that it could be true. And therefore, I did some research. And of course, confirmation bias is king when you go online. And therefore, I could find a million articles that told me, yes, the small caps are dead. But then, of course, if you do run the research on the opposite hand and look for positive small cap articles, you still find them. So it gets to a point where it's really, really confusing. And it did confuse me for sure. So what I did is to dive in. In this video, we're going to check out what happened to the small cap, if the size factor is still a thing, and we're going to dive into the data to make sure we know what's going on. I'm Alberto, and my goal is to find the best long-term strategy to invest in the stock market. To do that, we're going to use research, backtesting, and of course, a little bit of my own experience. And if you are ready to Jindex, welcome to Jasper's Door. So to make sure everyone is on the same page, we're going to quickly check what is the size factor. Size factor was firstly brought up by Eugene Pham and Kenneth French in 1992 through their study cross-section of expected stocks return. Now, it's a long study, and unless you're a geek, you won't find it interesting. But luckily for us, Investopedia got us covered. So I'm going to quote directly, small minus big, a factor in the Fama-French stock pricing model that says that smaller companies outperform larger ones over the long term. And that is pretty much the best news we could have, because now we know what to invest in. But how do we know if a stock is a big stock or a small stock? How do we compare to each other? We're going to use what is called a market cap, which is short for market capitalization. Market cap is nothing else but the value of the company's outstanding shares, or the same thing said in a different way would be the number of shares times the price of the share itself. It's as easy as that. Now, just to have an idea of the range that we can work in, we got New Ellis and Apple. New Ellis being the smallest cap stock that I could find at $500,000. This is not a joke, it's a real thing, and is traded, I believe, in the New York Stock Exchange. $500,000 for a market cap, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And on the other side, we have Apple with something, I think it's $3 trillion. I might be wrong with the reading of that number. It's very big. And in order to visualize it a little bit better, what I did is just put the calculator in, and you will need 5 million New Ellis in order to buy Apple. I find it fascinating. So that's the range we work in, but be aware there's a continuum in there with thousands of stocks that goes from small cap to the big cap. Now, the small cap are usually unknown, unappreciated, obviously, otherwise they would be big, and they do have higher expected returns. When we talk about small cap, we talk about something in between the $300 million up to $2 billion. I know it sounds big to billions, but then as we've seen, there's big cap stocks that are much, much bigger. On the opposite side of the ring, we have the big caps, which are the big name we are used to hear about, we are familiar with. Nvidia, Google, Amazon, Meta, Tesla, you know them. The thing is with the big caps that everybody loves them because of the familiarity bias. So everyone tend to buy big caps just because they never heard of the small cap. And I do believe that is a mistake. But we're here to figure out if that is just my opinion or is actually a good investment thought. Now, we are testing for figure out, this is the actual thesis of this entire video. We are here to test, to figure out if small caps outperform big caps. And to do that, we're going to introduce today's Jindex. Now, for those who didn't follow the previous video, a Jindex is a DIY investable index, something that you build yourself instead of allowing other people to do that for you, right? You do not invest in this S&P 500 because it exists. You just create something. So you create an index that suits your goals and make sure you are the one that decide what is needed to be in there. And also, you stop paying fees to banks and you try to outperform the market, which is an upside. You will see how in less than a minute. Now, again, we do have this continuum, small cap to big cap. We're going to flip it. And from there, in order to create this Jindex, we're going to select the top 10% and the bottom 10%. The first Jindex is just dedicated to big caps. So we're going to get a range of the top 10% and select from that range random stocks that will get into the Jindex, and we'll see you in a minute. And for the second Jindex, we're gonna look into the small cap range and pick random stocks from there. So these are the rules of the game, and this is the rules for each of the Jindex. As we said, random choice within that 10% range, top and bottom. 6 months is our holding time, and then we're going to refresh our portfolio with new big and small caps. 50 stocks per portfolio. Time frame is from 2000 to present, and then because it's randomly selected, we're going to run this experiment 5 times and then average it out in order to remove outliers. And of course, because we like to have a comparison, we are creating a fully random Jindex that is going to be in there to tell us if we are better than flipping a coin. And to be comprehensive, we're going to have 2 rounds. The first round is going to be fully dedicated to the planet, excluding the US. And then, of course, we're going to dedicate 1 round to the US. The reason behind this thinking is just the size of the data set. We have massive amount of data for the US, but we don't really have massive amount of data for each individual other country. So we're going to group them together and treat them as an investing country. So let's focus on the rest of the world first. This is what happened. What you're seeing on the screen right now is green, indicating big cap. The blue indicates random. And Jindex number 2, the small cap, is on top at this time, and that's on in yellow. Again, please remember this is the average of 5 tests each, and the random, if you saw the last video, is the average of 10 different runs of a fully random Jindex. And now the data is in. So what we can learn from this, right away we can see that small caps tend to outperform, but then it just dropped at the end of the experiment, dropped below the random Jindex. And of course, we can see that the big cap did not ever threaten to outperform the random. We kind of saw that in the last video when we compare the performance of the S&P 500 with a random Jindex, and the S&P 500 couldn't keep up. I do suggest you to look at that. It's fascinating how much money we put in the S&P when a random Jindex would outperform. It's crazy. But back to the small caps, you can see, like, my first reaction to this was okay, the obvious volatility of it is scary. I would never want to invest in an index that is so volatile. But also he has some upsides, and definitely you can see how it recovers really fast after periods of drawdowns, after major drawdowns. You can see after the dot-com bubble in 2003, there's a spike there. Actually, let me show you better. This is the same graph. So this graph and this graph are the same chart. The y-axis becomes logarithmic, and that means that if you put any 2 points on any line on this graph, the slope, the angle that connects those 2 points, that represents the rate of return independently of the amount of money in the portfolio, which makes it much easier to compare two lines over time, to compare two portfolios over the time. And you can see what I was saying before, that after the drops in 2000 to 2003, that's the dot-com bubble, 2008, great financial crisis, and then after COVID, you can see how the drops are always followed for small caps by big increases. And that it's pretty much what, if I was to invest into small cap, what I want to exploit. But also you can see how high interest rates periods like the one after 2021 makes the small cap suffer quite a bit. And the drawdown is so big, in fact, that they lose all the advantage and they get below the random. On the other hand, big cap obviously is not outperforming at all, but it's way more consistent. There's a lot less volatility and more consistency in the return. We kind of did expect that for the nature of big caps. Let's see what America does. Let's get in, and we're gonna have now the same chart, and let's see what happens. Okay, the data is in, much better for the small cap. Still immense volatility, which is not good. Again, this is very hard to read, so we're going to bring it into the logarithmic scale, and these are the returns over time. You can see again how 2003, 2008, and after COVID, that's the spikes where the small cap, I guess small caps really like moment of optimism. When people become optimistic, they start putting money towards small caps. That is probably one of the takeaways I would take from this chart. But again, high interest rates are actually pushing small caps down on the right side after 2021. It's pretty messy. You can see you will be losing a lot of money, especially hard to withstand when the market is actually hitting new highs. So what is that we can learn from these charts? First of all, we see how small cap tend to perform very well after a period of drawdowns, but they tend to suffer higher interest rates period, which is no surprise. The small caps tend to have less money to play with, and they tend to be less consolidated into the market, which means they can find it hard when borrowing becomes expensive. Higher volatility is not a surprise, but also they do outperform the large caps. I think those charts are very clear on that. We found that is a persistent and robust trend. What we saw out there, it was considerable as a factor, but in order to make absolutely sure that is a factor that actually affects your investing, we need to find out if the exposure to this factor, is there a linear correlation in between how exposed you are and the returns you're having. And to do that, we're going to simply use the same continuum, do the same thing we did before, create the top and the bottom, that's the 10%, but also we're going to go ahead and create 10 different groups that contains the same amount of stocks. We're going to just give them the name of the range they are into. So this is a 90, 80 Jindex, this is a 70-80, this is a 60-70, and you get it. Remember to subscribe and also go all the way down to small cap. Now, for each of these Jindexes, we use a global data set. The selection is random within the decile range, and also 50 stocks per decile is what we use to build the Jindex. We're going to, again, rebalance every 6 months. You can run both experiments you've seen in this video. Click on the description. That's where it is, and it's all free. You can run it for free at home. So, are you ready? On the left side, we can find the groups we talked about, and on the right side, we're going to find the corresponding returns. Do you think the correlation is there? Let's see. Now, this is big caps. We're going to go down to 80, 90, 70, 80, 60, 70, 50, 60, 40, 50, 30, 40, 20, 30, 10, 20. And this is a Jindex of only small cap. I'm going to go up and down quickly right now just to have a mental picture of what happens, of the correlation in between how high into the continuum we are and the results we get. And then we're going to have a couple of things we can take away from this. So ready? This is small cap going upwards towards big cap. And then again, down. And now it's even faster. We can see an immediate correlation. The more you push down towards small cap, the more the returns are strong and high. But I would like to focus your attention over 2 points here. This is the first important point. In order to match with a random stock index, we need a Jindex that is at least 40% small cap. So you really need, this is not even half, you need to really push down. We have a second Jindex, which is worth of mention, 20 to 30, the second to the third decile. They have a very strong spike at the end, but it doesn't look to be as strong as an outperformance as the others. And these two guys, they are forming the bulk with extreme volatility, granted, but reforming the bulk of the outperformance of the small caps. Now, keep that in mind that those are the high returns, because if those are the high returns we expect right there at the bottom, only that 20% are those caps, the small caps that brings up the high returns. And we have a total of around 3,000 stocks, probably higher than that. But this is what Russell says. We say that the Russell 3000 encompass 98% of the stocks in the US market. Then would you think is wise to call the Russell 2000 a small cap ETF or a small cap index? Because I don't think it is. Like, if you're aiming to produce performance for your ETF, for your index, I don't think that buying that many stock would be wise at all. In fact, this experiment tells us the opposite. Now, the high returns part of this scale, that's probably around 500-600 stocks, not more. And from those, I will probably want to filter out those with a bad balance sheet. So I would say it's even less. Now, keeping that in mind, we think now to other ETFs out there that are seemingly dedicated to small cap stocks, but I don't think they are, because if we're aiming to have less than 500 high quality small cap stocks in there, why would you buy then a Vanguard small cap ETF with 1,300 stocks in there? And you can see it immediately that if you move your eyes down, the medium market cap of those so-called small cap, it's $8 billion. That's a lot of money. Forbes says it's around 300 million up to 2 billion. Of course, $2 billion sounds a lot of money. It's a lot, but it's not compared to the very big ones. Meanwhile, the range is much higher than what we see in the ETFs, right? And this is Schwab. They own small cap, 1,700 stocks in there. Again, fully arbitrary. They decided by themselves. They probably tracking some other index. And the reason for that is up there. I mean, that's the GDP of Luxembourg. And it's contained in a single ETF. That's why they cannot only focus on the very small end, the small caps that actually outperform. And that's why I wouldn't recommend buying small cap ETFs or ETFs in general, because when they build these things, they are actually creating them so they themselves can manage them, and they're not keeping your best interest into consideration. This is another example for Dimensional, which I believe is they're doing a great job, but they're too big to be doing this for your best interest. And that's why we create our own Jindexes. We build our own Jindexes. That's why we teach you, and like we teach any person or business alike, how to build a Jindex that is created on your own goals with the outperformance in mind, instead of just buying an ETF that is not necessarily built for your outperformance. And of course, we're going to populate the Jindex leaderboard with all the factors we're going to come across and all that is experimentable with data. Now, if you want to see the complete leaderboard, you can jump on jasperzor.com/leaderboard. And if you want to subscribe to this channel, what you can expect, let's talk about me and you for a second. My goal is to find the best way to invest in the stock market for the long term. To do that, we're going to use research, backtest, and my own experience. And if you want to subscribe to this channel, that will help a lot us. And hopefully it will give you all the tools you need to invest with confidence. I'm Alberto, and this is Jasper's Door.